Hey, how's everybody doing today? Hope you guys are having a great week. I'm going to talk to you from Psalm 78 today, and I'm going to look at some of the first verses here. Oh, my people, listen to my instruction. Open your ears to what I'm saying, for I will speak to you in a parable. I will teach you hidden lessons from our past, stories we have heard and known, stories our ancestors handed down to us. We will not hide these truths from our children. We will tell the next generation about the glorious deeds of the Lord, about his power and his mighty wonders. For he issued his laws to Jacob. He gave his instructions to Israel. He commanded our ancestors to teach them to their children, so the next generation might know them, even the children not yet born, and they in turn will teach their own children. So each generation should set its hope anew on God, not forgetting his glorious miracles and obeying his commands. You know, there's a lot of talk these days about history, a lot of new looks at history, and people trying, there are certain aspects where, maybe there are things that need to come out that hadn't, but there are also people try to shade history towards more their current common belief. And if you look at it in an objective sense, you would think, well, we have so many more advantages because we have access to so much more information, to so much more history. But the fact is that I don't think there's ever been a time where people really knew less about U.S. history, the history of our country or where we're from, than they do right now. If you look at that from a Christian standpoint, there's never been a time where there have been more resources, where there have been more readily accessible resources, and yet people don't read the Bible. People don't know the Bible. Christians are constantly deceived by false doctrines because they don't know what the right doctrine is. So why is that? Because you would think that the more access to information we have, the more we would access that information, the more we would know. But that's not the way it works. See, the way it works is the way God set it up here in the beginning, that it would be passed down from generation to generation. And there's something about that connection that we have about something personal. Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's just somebody close in our lives, but they pass down a truth to us that they've learned, or we gain something from them, and that's much more meaningful than any kind of information that we might glean from a book. Now, is there anything wrong learning from books? Absolutely not. But one of the things that I believe we all recognize at some point in life is how much we long to have a connection to those that have come before us. And, there are a couple things that in this scripture that I found to be interesting, because this psalm, it goes through all of the failures of the Israelites, all the times when a lot of the times when they were unfaithful, about how they told God they were going to worship him, but they were lying in their hearts, all those things. But if you read that in the context of verse 4, it says, we will not hide these truths from our children. We will tell the next generation. The only way that generations down the line knew about the unfaithfulness of former generations was if the former generations had been honest and told that to their children, and their children told it to their children. And so, we have this thing now about, well, if we can go back and see someone in our past, or in our lineage, or who was one of the founding fathers of this country who was not perfect, then that eliminates everything else about them. But that is the farthest thing from the truth. The truth is that we need those connections to people who've come before us. I mean, there's something about the connection that we have in faith with our ancestors. There's something in us that longs to know that we're connected to people that were here before. I mean, why else would people spend all this money to find out what their genealogy is and where they're from? It's because we long to know where we come from. And there's good and bad in everybody's history. And, I look back on some of the things that I learned from relatives, from people that were, influential in my life when I was young, my parents, my grandmothers. And, that I can look back and objectively see none of them were perfect, And yet there's something about those things that they pass down to me that are of value. And so we were designed this way. We're designed to want to pass down. I want to be able to pass down to my kids certain things. I'm not talking about stuff. I'm talking about truths. I'm talking about foundations. I'm talking about principles. There are things that I want them to know, and I want them to know that from me. And that's why it's so important that we share our faith, not only with our kids, if you're a parent, but with the people that we have influence over in our lives. Maybe people that we're close to, that we pass down those generational truths so that it goes from one generation to the next. And that's how history really gets passed down. That's how a legacy of faith really gets passed down. Now, you might look back and think, well, I didn't get that from my parents, but it's in you to give it to someone else. And that's what we do is we have to pass these things down. And that doesn't mean we have to go into every nook and cranny of sin or mistake in our lives, but that we're honest about our failures, because oftentimes our failures bring light to the glory of God. And that's what happens in this passage. There's places where it talks about they were faithless, but then it says that, then they remembered that God was their rock. This is in verse 35, that he would be merciful to them. All they gave him was lip service. They lied to him with their tongues. Their hearts were not loyal to him. They did not keep his covenant. Yet he was merciful and forgave their sins and did not destroy them all. Many times he held back his anger and did not unleash his fury. You see, those are important things to pass down, is the mercy and the goodness of God. And sometimes that's best illustrated to our children in us being honest about our own failures and our own doubts. I'm not saying you got to tell everything, but don't try to paint a perfect picture. We're not trying to paint a perfect picture of the past. We're simply trying to paint a true picture of who God is and to pass that down to our kids. And that's really the way foundation is built. And that's how legacies are built. It's not my legacy. I'm just passing down what was passed down to me. And that's what Paul talks about too. Pass these things down to good and faithful men who will pass them down to others. And that's really how history is supposed to work. And that's how we learn how to value what's passed down to us. It's when we have a connection to the one passing it. And maybe it even goes farther back than that, is we can see where those things come from. And so you don't have to be perfect to pass a legacy down to your kids, or to pass that down to the people that you love, that you care about, that you're closest to. You just have to pass Jesus to them, and as best you can, as best you know of him, and the testimonies about how he delivered you in your life. And those are things that your kids can remember and maybe even recite to their kids. So I just wanted to encourage you by that some of the ways in Scripture where we most see the faithfulness of God is tied to the unfaithfulness of man. And it's a way to redeem those shortcomings and those failures of ours in the past, is to hey, this was me, I blew it, but guess what? God was faithful. And we pass that down to those that come after us. And that's a much more valuable gift than a book, is to pass down the personal experiences that we have with the Lord, the truths that we've seen with our own eyes and in our own lives. We pass that down to others, and then they pass theirs down to someone else. So I hope that's an encouragement to you. Hope you guys have a great week, and we'll hope to see you this Sunday, either in person or online. God bless.